I am. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this first Google Hangout that we're hosting here at City and Guilds. And I'm joined by two friends who are going to talk us through the theme today, which is all around the FELTAG report. We are going to be taking questions, so please do feed in your questions, and we'll feed as many of those to our guest speakers here today, and just try and get as much debate going as possible. This is the first time, again, I will repeat that we're having a Google Hangout. There may be some technical glitches, so do bear with us, but we hope it's going to be the first of many. So let me go on and introduce myself. Kirstie Donnelly, I'm the UK Managing Director for City and Guilds. I'm also joined by Bob Harrison. Bob is Education Advisor at Toshiba, a founding member of the FELTAG group, and we'll hear a little bit more about how it did get founded from Bob shortly. I'm Vice Chair of the Governors at Northern College, and I'm also joined by Bryan Mathers, who is a Learning Technology Consultant for City and Guilds. So welcome, Bob and Bryan, and thank you for giving up your time today. So, Bob, where did FELTAG come from? We believed, or we heard, that it was started with some tweeting.
Yeah, I'll tell you all about that, but I've just realised we should have gone to Regain as a sponsor for this event, shouldn't we? You know, the hair restoration.
I'll let you borrow mine.
Well, the tweet was a pivotal movement in it. I think there's a delicious irony there, isn't there, really, if you think about it, that it would be social media and technology that has led to where we've got to now. But it started a little bit before that, in that you know, I'd worked for many years in further education, and then as a principal, and I became a governor. I'd worked at City and Guilds as the chief examiner for many years. So you know, I spent most of my working life in further education and adult education as well. And increasingly, I'd become disillusioned, frustrated, angry, if you like, about the amount of money that had been wasted, the amount of multi-millions of pounds, you know, the Vector, you know, £80 million a year budget, had an FE strategy and all that, ELSIS spending multi-million pounds of our money, and increasingly showing little return on that investment. And the very last Vector survey of colleges, which was done in 2011, under the previous government, showed that even with all that investment and all that effort and all that money spent, less than 30% of colleges were using technology effectively. Now, I thought that was a massive indictment. So I wrote a couple of very critical pieces. One called "Where Are the Pioneers?", which was about the old thinking in the FE system, and that got printed in the Times Education Supplement. And then FE Week ran an article that I wrote called "Where's All the Money Gone?", and really was a criticism again of those agencies and the quangos. And
why do you think it got picked up by the minister? Do you think it just was something that really just attuned with him in some way? The fact that this bottom-up movement, people just feeling generally fed up by all this money that had been spent over the past, really, I think you're talking at least a decade, given the references you've made to those different organisations, Bob. And I suppose there is a second question in that, which is, why has it taken so long, given all the other movements that have happened in social media in the last 5 years, even last 2 or 3 years? Why in our sector has it taken literally nearly 2 decades to get to this point?
Okay, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. First answer to the first point was why did it get picked up? I think for 2 reasons. One, Matthew Hancock had just been appointed as the FE and Skills Minister, and the reason he picked it up was he's very social media savvy. So you know, his family business is internet based. He was a minister in FE and Skills. He went to an FE college, you know, to do part of his studying before he went on to university. And so, whether one of his policy advisors or one of his SPADs had pointed out these articles, I don't know. But the interesting thing was, I was sat at home on a Sunday night about 18 months, 2 years ago, and I got a direct message from him on Twitter, because he follows me on Twitter, and he just said, "I'm really interested in some of the points you made. Next time you're in London, will you pop in and see me?" Now, as it happened, I was chairing the review of the national curriculum, ICT curriculum group, and I was in London the following week, and so I popped in to see him. And that's where it all started. And basically what he said was, okay, what do we need to do? He said, I agree with you. I think FE has been left behind in terms of addressing the digital issues. And that brings me to your second question. Why is that? Why is that? Well, I think there are a number of reasons. I think there's been a lack of leadership and governance. I think there's been a lack of vision in terms of policy makers. And I have to say, and this is not just FE colleges or FE providers, but I think schools, to a lesser extent universities, although in some areas, education can become very insular, can become very inward looking, and it's very conservative with a small c. So I think for all those reasons, you know, and particularly at FE, we've got left further and further behind.
And I think we can't ignore the fact, although I think we're obviously putting some frustration across there about why certain things haven't happened. Let's also be fair to the sector, and like you say, particularly FE, they have faced so many changes, so many challenges in terms of funding, in terms of policy, in terms of new agendas from the different framework stakeholders, whether it's SFA, whether it's Ofqual, whether it's Ofsted. You know, we are constantly faced with a plethora of changes. So there's no doubt they have also new barriers. But your answer leads me on to one of the key themes, actually, of the FELTAG report so far, which is around capabilities. It's clear there's a whole host of recommendations in the report around capabilities. Just very quickly in a soundbite, Bob, and then I'm going to come to Brian and ask him the same question. What's one of the key capability changes that you think has got to happen if we're to deliver anything close to what the report's suggesting?
Right. Well, I'm going to turn this back on you, and as an honorary life honorary member of City and Guilds, I'm entitled to do this.
Changing the rules of the game.
yeah. I'll tell you one of the greatest inhibitors, and it's you lot, not you particularly, not your City and Guilds, because I think the fact that you're doing this and the fact you're tackling this, you know, and even 10 years ago when I was chief examiner, you were starting to get your head around this, but. You know, talking and listening to people out there across all sectors, not just FE, is one of the greatest inhibitors and blockers to progress is the assessment system. So, you know, if we're talking about capabilities, you know, I'd throw the question back to you and say, what are the assessment bodies doing in terms of changing their practice and their capabilities? Because at the end of the day, the assessment system tends to wag the pedagogical dog, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's a lot we said. I mean, I don't disagree with that challenge. I think there's a lot in the report as well, or there's some mention, I think Brian will probably want to come in on that one around badging. For example, people have often said to me, goodness, how threatened are you by badging? And, you know, my answer is, well, not at all. I'm wholly supportive of it and wholly recognise the need for very different ways in which assessment needs to be delivered and supported. One of the issues we've got, of course, is the regulation around assessment, and indeed trying to push back from being able to have more and more online assessment. So very fair pushback and fair challenge. Brian, before I bring you on that, we have had a question actually coming in, I think, from Martin King. Martin's actually suggesting or asking, I think, is money the problem rather than the solution? Because it becomes a distraction to real change. So I think that's actually quite a fair point. And
I think Martin touched on a good point, and I think you need to set that the issue about money. And 2 points about money. I'll come to the second one in a minute. The first one is in the last decade, under the previous administration, the whole education sector got used to a culture of top-down national strategies, national quangos, national agencies. I mean, let's be right. I mean, you know, I was on the Vector National Advisory Board, but if you know, Vector to some extent was a great facilitator, it was also a great inhibitor because you know, lots of people couldn't do anything unless they got approval and everything like that. So I think what built up and still exists is that colleges and providers will say, well, unless you give us some project funding, unless you give us some ring fence funding, we can't afford to do this.
Yeah.
So I think there's a culture of dependency.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let's just come back to the capability point. Brian, you know, I know that you've got some thoughts on the capability aspects, building on from...
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a conundrum here in that with regards to the different levels of people and the sort of the capability issues that they have, each can sort of point to the group further up the chain. You know, so I think learners can point to, you know, tutors and teachers inside staff inside FE colleges. You know, FE colleges can talk to or point at the system, you know, or Ofsted, Ofqual awarding bodies. You know, we can talk about you know, government policy. You know, so everybody can point at someone else essentially. So, but it is a bit of an odd game where, you know, it is a bit like it's a sport where you're asking someone to referee who has never played the sport before and doesn't know the rules. You know what I mean? Where you know, which leads in a bit of a sort of a chicken and egg situation. You know, how do you value the digital skills that young people are developing, regardless of the system? You know, and how do you let that have impact on, you know, their tutors, their teachers, and indeed, in the report talks to this, the strategy that the college or institution themselves would have with regards to learning technology. So it is a bit of a conundrum. You know,
so I mean, are you sort of referencing there, and I think it sort of links to what Bob was making the point about funding, people using funding as an excuse. In a way, this almost we're able to hide behind some of the issues to do about capability and capacity and funding, rather than, if you think about some of the greatest successes that we've seen in technology and social media in the last decade and certainly the last 5 years, they have been largely bottom up. People have just got off the bottom and gone and done something and made it happen.
Let me make a comment about capability, because I think you're absolutely right. I think the biggest issue in terms of capability, it's not about money, it's not about workforce, it's not about skills, it's about mindset.
Culture.
The greatest, I mean, and if you think about this, I mean, you know, in my presentations I use the S-curve, the sigmoid curve thing about, and then in fact in that Times Educational Supplement piece, it's about paradigm pioneers. Now, with the greatest of respect to all my fellow principal colleagues and governors and everything like that, the FE system, in fact the education system itself, was designed and predicated on an industrial model, wasn't it? It came out of the Industrial Revolution, predicated on mechanisation, you know, predicated on the views of Taylorism, that you put stuff in at one end and you get stuff out at the other end, all right? So that's the mindset that currently is embodied in the SFA, in college principals and governing bodies. It's and to me, that's the greatest capability issue. It's about thinking. It's about what we're trying to do is to use an industrial mechanised model of thinking or preparing young people for a digital world, and it doesn't work. So when Matthew Hancock, you know, 18 months ago said, well, what's the first thing we need to do? What are the things that we need to do? Bearing in mind it's no money. Having said that, there is £8.6 billion goes into the FE system every year. And Brian, before you get chastised by the Association of Learning Providers, you need to talk about FE providers, not FE colleges, because they get very upset about things like that. So,
accepted.
Okay, so
no, I think you make a very important point there, Bob, about culture, and I think, you know, there is definitely a need for you know, a big culture shift across I'll say the wider skills sector, which is both obviously FE and also the provider world. And I think if we could engender that culture that led to more collaboration, more community, and then even more content sharing and curation, we could create much more of a bottom-up movement. However, I still maintain one of the biggest barriers, and I think again it is touched on in the report very clearly, is how do we give those teachers the support they need, the training they need, because right now they're teaching and working with young people who are far more sophisticated than they are in the tools that they need to use.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm going to be really provocative now. I think that's dead right, and I'm going to be provocative on 2 counts. Firstly, I think there are some teachers in FE that we're not going to be able to teach that. They're not, you know, they've either got the mindset, or they've come to a point in their career, or they've come from a vocational area, and they've been in an FE college for so many years. You know, and I don't think they are willing to accommodate the shift in mindset. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is, I'm going over to see my mum after we finish this. She lives in Rochdale, about 15 miles away from here.
You watching you, Bob?
Yeah. I drive past Rochdale College, it's called Hopwood Hall College, and right next door to Rochdale Hopwood Hall College, they've just built a brand new multi-storey sixth form college funded through slightly different mechanisms. Now, if that isn't madness, I don't know what is. How on earth can we justify having a building that currently, Hopwood Hall College, is empty for 30, 25 weeks of the year or 20 weeks of the year? I drive past it 3 and 4 times a week. It's empty. There's hardly any people. And not only do we make the best use of that physical capacity, we built another right next to it. Now, my answer would be to sell off some of the buildings, tap into the way people are moving. I mean, like we're doing now. Look, people live on their devices, they live on mobile devices. So my view is there is plenty of money, Kirstie. There's plenty of money.
How you divert it.
It's how you realise the asset. And my challenge is out on the governing body of the college that I'm working on, that I work on, is to challenge the rest of the governors, to challenge the principal, is to say, when you start talking about extending or renovating or developing new, you're thinking in the wrong paradigm.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, Bob. And actually, funny enough, while you've been talking, we have another question come through, and well, 2 actually that are linked. One is around, I think it's from Lynn Taylorson, from doing some research, ETF research on practitioners using learning technology, because really that, I think, is actually one of the nubs of the issues we've got and the opportunities if we're staying positive on this, because there's no doubt there's a lot of positive in this FELTAG report. But Lynn rightly says only of the research they've done so far, only 14% of the 100 people they surveyed think FELTAG's 50% recommendation for online delivery is achievable. That's really interesting, because also we've had another comment about like maths and English, which has become a funding condition, should online delivery. Now, we know the report does talk about a percentage by 15-16, but to be honest, that's going to be very difficult to achieve if we don't address some of these barriers.
Well, let's just put this, okay, I understand that, and let's set this in the policy context. At the moment, you've got those recommendations that are in, and you've got the minister who is currently considering those recommendations, and his civil servants who are currently drafting his response. Now, when it was launched on the February the 27th at the Education Innovation Conference and warmly received, the civil servants responsible said, right, well, we'll get the minister's response out as soon as possible, and said, oh, it'll be out within, the end of the month and everything like that. What he failed to recognise is the complexity and the difficulty and the challenge in getting some of those quangos, some of those agencies, some of those civil service to try and respond. Now let me tackle the percentage one right head on. So I don't think the 50% issue until we see the minister's response. I would advise providers not to get too hung up about it.
Right.
What I would say is it's a headline grabber. It was the one recommendation that I knew journalists with their simplistic knowledge of the system would pick up on, because it's
a direction of travel, basically.
It's a direction of travel. It's an ambition, and we need to get into much more detail about that. About what do we mean by online? What do we mean by percentage of teaching hours and everything like that? So that whole area. It's an ambition.
Okay. Well, I think that's helpful. That leads me on. I'm going to bring Brian in now, because I think that leads me on that's actually probably very helpful for people to hear who are in the Hangout as well right now, and probably a little bit of comfort from that too. But I think it's right. I think it's right that FELTAG have set a bold ambition or set a bold travel direction. Now, clearly, let's come round to technology and technology. The link between that statement and technology, because clearly, again, the report mentions MOOCs, VOOCs, versions of, and clearly, one way of trying to deliver more online in the skills sector would be to develop more VOOC or MOOC type environments. What's your view of that, Brian?
Well, again, it's not. That's what makes this tricky. It's not just about deploying technology that is already in place. It's more like innovating with emerging technology. So, and the MOOC VOOC thing is a good example of that. MOOC is an emerging phenomenon, right? I know, Bob, you've done a few MOOCs, and I'm really enjoying the MOOC that I'm doing at the minute with the University of Queensland on sort of thinking, right? And I can really see how I can really see the potential of where MOOCs can reach, that other educational structures can't, right? But it is emerging, as in there are different platforms doing different things, and look, there's a bunch of people experimenting with MOOC technology, and one of our jobs is to go, okay, well, what does that mean in a vocational context, and how can we gather or be potentially a channel for the facilitation of those books to see FE providers, note I said providers there, Bob, FE providers to reach larger markets potentially, right? Or to be able to provide services that are more efficient through the use of technology. But it's innovation focused, right? The report also talks about badges. Again, the amount of experimentation that needs to be done around badges is significant. You know what I mean?
We don't have the answers.
And I mean both, research that is a longer game that draws from experiments, well-run experiments, but also, innovators inside colleges, being able to try stuff out, in the domain that they have. And the report also tries to talk to how do you encourage that sort of need-focused innovation?
So in a way, that's back to Bob. I think that's back to then this whole idea right at the beginning that I think Bob and I were talking about, that culture. It's almost like free the innovation, allow the culture to happen. We just had a good question actually, which I think links, Brian, to some of what you're saying. I think it's just I've just lost it off my page, but
can I just pick up on? Ryan mentioned a couple of things there.
Very quickly, because I do want to bring these questions in, Bob. From
Okay. Well, it covers the ETF question in some respects as well. The person from the ETF. It's not surprising, really, if you ask people. I mean, that's the reason we've got FELTAG, because the mindset in colleges is providers is the way that it is. It's not surprising if you say to somebody, right, we're going to move to 50%. What do you feel about that? They're going to say, whoa, no, I'm not, sir. The second point I'd like to make is really important. Brian mentioned the word efficiencies there. Let's be very clear. The minister's very, very clear about this. This is not about efficiencies. This is about effectiveness. This is about taking the resources that the system has at the moment and engaging with more learners and improving learning outcomes. It's not about saving money, because you and I all know that investing in online and blended learning actually costs money. It doesn't save money, and the minister's very keen to make sure that people understand this is about making the system more effective, not necessarily more efficient. Okay?
No, I think that's a very good point. I think that is a very good point. And ultimately, eventually, you can get the two together. Is where you get the magic. When you create the effectiveness, you can ultimately create the efficiencies.
Yeah,
and that's the calculation. We've just had I think it was from Rachel, and rightly so, and really links to what you were just talking about as well, Brian. Has anybody actually asked or involved learners about the use of technology in education? Something I feel very passionate about as well, because I think sometimes we do tend to, in our own institutions, our own policy, our own organisations, almost choose for learners. But actually, one of the things I think that's been so fascinating about the social media revolution is they have actually chosen for themselves. What's your view of that, Brian?
Well, again, that's one of the things that really encouraged me about the report, because in the learner section of the recommendations, you'll see that sort of collaborative suggestion where how do we get learners involved in the learning technology and assessment strategy of the college. Now the big question there is how how do you join that stuff up, but yeah, the report quite clearly points to how do you involve learners at helping the digital leader.
Yes.
The recommendations, how do you involve the collaboration between them and their teacher, but also right up to the top of the college. How do you allow colleges to have learners to have impact? But I think that's the question that providers are trying to answer anyway. They know that needs to be joined. It's a question of well, how do I let that conversation take place?
Bob, you want to come in on that?
Yeah. This is where I'm with Brian 100%. Yesterday I was with 180 primary school teachers, ICT teachers in London, chairing a conference. And digital leaders, all the things that I'm most proud of in my career and life and everything like that, is Toshiba supported me when we piloted digital leaders in schools about 6 or 7 years ago. There are now thousands of schools. I talked to 4 young people, primary school children yesterday, who were teaching their teachers how to use Scratch, how to use
how brilliant is that though, Bob? Isn't that great? That's encouraged. That's a good thing.
Exactly. But let me tell you the frustration that I had 4 years ago. I was invited to speak to people at ELSIS about the experience of digital leaders in schools and whether the potential was in FE. And basically, you know, they turned me away. They said, no, there's no chance. It'll never catch on in FE and everything like that. And one of the things I'm most pleased about FELTAG is we did engage with the learners. There was a learners work stream. We had learners on. We researched with learners. And like you say, and like college principals are telling me up and down the country, listen, we don't need to wait for FELTAG. Our learners are telling us we need to do this.
Well, it's funny you should say that. I've just been past some Twitter quotes really, or points people want to make. I think it's a great one here. If FE, so a bit of a warning, if FE don't get online and give young people what they want, then other organisations will. I think that's a fair comment. And then another comment here, I think from Martin King again, agrees with what you're saying, Bob, about where's all the money gone. So I think people feeling quite passionate about what about all this investment. If we added all that up over the last decade alone, what would that have given us? And then we've also got another question here, which I think we started to touch on a little bit, but Stephanie's asking us, what is the biggest barrier to FELTAG being realised? And I think some of those barriers we've touched on, which is around the collaboration, the need to release innovation, the need to actually get the Quangos and the stakeholders all collaborating and working together.
Biggest barriers to FELTAG being implemented? Here.
Culture.
Here. In the heads.
Yeah.
In the heads of the governors and the principals and the senior management teams. It's not in the heads of the students and the learners. And it's not in the heads of some of the teachers. And Matthew Hancock's very clear. FELTAG is about creating the space for teachers to innovate with the use of technology. And that might mean us reinvesting some of the money that we currently put into capital buildings, into other
things. But I think that's very interesting, that comment that came in on the Twitter feed about, you know, well, if FE doesn't respond, others will. And actually, you know, whilst some might interpret that as a veiled threat, the reality is that is already happening. It's fair to say, well, that's already happening, isn't it?
Absolutely already happening. I agree with Brian. I mean, I've done 4 MOOCs now. I've never completed one of them, but I've learned an awful lot. I actually don't think the acronym is really helpful now. But at the end of the day, all the research shows is that blended learning, a combination of face-to-face and online delivery, is the most effective. So I think it's absolutely right. One of the things that's emerging is in the FELTAG report, and you've got to remember, you know, what the minister is in a coalition government that believes in the free market, etc., etc. FELTAG is saying the whole system needs to be opened up to public-private partnerships.
Well, actually, that's interesting you say that. Can I just come in there, Bob? Because actually, one thing we haven't touched on, I'm conscious we're probably going to start running out of time shortly. In fact, the fact that the question is still going to come in, mean if you guys are fine with it, I'm going to keep it going a little bit longer. But employers, we've not touched on that theme of employers, which again features very much in the report. You just really prompted it really with your statement, Bob, about, you know, this needing to start to feel more of a partnership between the private and the public sector. What role do you see for employers, and actually what's their motivation for this, do you think?
Well, I think if you talk to people like Laura Overton from Towards Maturity, if you talk to the Association of Learning Providers, if you talk to Donald Taylor from the Learning and Skills Group, employers are already doing this. You know, if you look at the major employers, they're already investing massively in online delivery and everything like that. I was with a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, Chris Brannigan from Caspian Learning yesterday. Yeah. You know, he's been approached by, you know, big employers, global employers, you know, who are investing massive amounts of money. So to some extent, unless I mean, I love FE. It's been my life. But unless it wakes up soon and decides with a different view and a different mindset and a different set of partnerships, then I think it will get left behind.
Well, it's funny to say. I think that again is very true. Again, probably feeding on from that comment and the tweet before. someone else has written here, we think, well, they think FELTAG may form, this is very interesting actually, form part of a natural selection for, so we're going a bit Darwin is here.
Do you want me to be really provocative? Do you want me to be really provocative? This will get your readers, this will get your listeners thinking. How about this? Twice as many learners, half as many colleges, providers. Twice as many learners.
Well, certainly this quote here is saying, for part of a natural selection for providers, those who get it right will thrive, and those who don't will fold or get merged or taken over. So I think probably. So clearly, some very, very interesting perspectives coming through there. I mean, one thing I just kind of wanted to move on to as we start to think about wrapping up on is really, if we were to grant all three of us, I mean, I'm sort of going to give myself a wish too, but to grant you all a wish, including myself, I suppose, what would your wish be around the FELTAG report? Perhaps, Brian, I'll come to you first.
Well, I would really like to see open badges being got behind, you know, at multiple levels. I know at City and Guilds we're getting behind them, but I'd like to see them inside those other institutions that we mentioned as a potential solution to how we fund granular distance travelled. Also in terms of the engagement with employers, you know, and sort of broadening into that space and how badges would overlap, you know, into that space. And also in terms of providing a much more fluid approach to and a personalised approach to how a learner can achieve. So yeah, for me that's the real the real dream. I think it's going to happen anyway, but you know what? There's so much opportunity there if we got behind it. You know, if the organisations involved in FELTAG got behind it. So that's
okay, thanks for that. And Bob, what about you? What would be your one?
I'd go back to vision and different mindset and different ways of thinking. I think, unfortunately, you know, the leadership of the system, and that goes through the policy officials in biz, goes through the quangocrats, goes through the senior leadership and the governance of colleges. I think that we need to get them. They need to see the world as it's becoming rather than what it's been.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting really, because I think in my one wish, in fact I'm probably going to grab myself two, but I'll try and weave them together in a clever way, would be that really building on your wish, Bob, that those stakeholders, the quangocrats, if you call them, that they would come together and actually create a collaboration that really enable this to happen top down, but at the same time there would be a bottom-up movement, just as there has been in the wider social media movement, because I think if we get the bottom-up movement and the top-down culture changing, then we actually might get somewhere to scale, because it's only if we do this to scale will we really see the kind of impacts we've been talking about here. Bob, I suppose one sort of final question really, so what's next? When can we expect to hear from the Minister? Because I know we've been promised his report back quite, you know, a number of times now, but is it coming, or is it just going to get buried under a carpet, do you think?
No, I absolutely, definitely will not get buried under a carpet. One, because the DFE, the biz have stripped all the carpets out. They can't afford carpets anymore. No, it definitely won't get buried. I think if I was to summarise it at the moment, it will be to say it's currently in a challenging position of between the passion and will and vision of the Minister and the obstacles and difficulties and policy and sensitivities there are in bringing about change in the system. So that's where it is. The reason it's taking longer is that he wants it to happen, and he wants it to happen quickly, but the system has got to push back, because there are some of the areas. I mean, the percentage one's a classic example. Great idea. Wonderful headline, but in terms of detail, it needs really working and thinking through.
Absolutely. So really what you said is it will be coming, but it's coming soon, as opposed to you can say exactly when. Well,
the question is, would you rather have something that's not fit for purpose quickly, or something that will actually make an impact and be fit for purpose a bit longer? And let's be right, you know, it's June almost now. you know, I don't think the minister is one of those ministers who likes to publish things on the last day of term, knowing that everybody's going to bugger off on holiday.
Sure. Well, certainly looking at some of the points that have been coming in on our Twitter feed and actually in the Hangout, I think I'm generally picking up that most people would rather that the detail was going to be in it rather than it just carried on being sweeping statements that people can't then get behind, and because I think that's as important as anything. So I think it's probably time to really just wrap up and say thank you very much, Bob, thank you very much, Brian, and of course, obviously, thank you very much out there to our Hangout audience. I hope you found it interesting. It's certainly been I think there's certainly a little information there, and we certainly would like to hear from you about any of the themes that you might like us to continue to talk about in future Hangouts, because we will be doing more, and we'd love to have your feedback about how our first Hangout went. So have lovely weekends. Oh, Bob,
there's a group of people that we ought to thank as well, because the key lesson for me and on you and all this is that just hasn't happened by accident. There's been quite a lot of technical support that's gone in to make this happen. Now, we've all learned in preparing and doing for this, you can understand how apprehensive teachers are about using technology, because we've had to learn some lessons. So big thanks to Rob and all the other people behind the scenes there who've set all this up, done a fantastic job.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that, and all of our friends in this Hangout probably don't realise just how many people are supporting me and Brian right now, and even holding up the seats. But, but we've got through it, and thanks very much everybody for all your participation. Have lovely weekends, and we'll hang out with you again very soon, we hope. Bye now.
Bye.
Cheers,
take care. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.